Hey, here I am today with a recent purchase, which is this. It's something I've wanted to get for a while, and it is an Ender 3 Pro. An Ender 3 Pro, if you do not know, is a 3D printer. And the Ender 3s are very entry level in the world of 3D printing. They are some of the lowest cost 3D printers that you can get. So what I've done is I've bought this, I've bought a kilogram of filament. I'm going to be opening this up, putting this together, doing a few test prints, and letting you know how it turns out. So let's get to it. Here I am after 1 week of 3D printing. Technically it was 2 weeks, but after the first week of printing I couldn't do any more because I've had a lot of work. But within that 1 week, this was what I was able to accomplish. So I'm going to talk about each of these individually. I'll show some close-ups on the video, but before I get to that, I'll just talk a little bit about setting up the printer. Now, setting up the printer was actually really easy. I thought it may be more hard or more complicated, but it came. Most of it was already assembled in the box, and the other steps were just very simple screwing things in and tightening things. What did make things a bit harder for me though was that I took it out the box, I read all the paper instructions, and then I put it together with only the paper instructions. This made it a lot harder. There's not as much detail on the paper instructions, and there was nothing to guide or supplement, but also paper instructions are from older Ender models, so if there's any new changes or anything that's slightly different, it may not be shown on the instructions. I then did discover that there is a full video setup on this. This is the USB micro SD card adapter. So you get a USB and the micro SD, and it had a full video set of instructions. But there was no paper instruction that told me there's more instructions. So it would have been nice if they included just a little note to say, check the micro USB. So it was really good. I got the Ender 3 Pro. It comes with all the extra tools. They're fine. They're cheap, but it's kind of like what you expect. You're buying a printer, you're not buying tools. The only thing I would say about these, though, they ended up coming quite grubby and dirty, so I need to give them a quick wipe before I use them. There was a couple of things I did do wrong, which was looking at some online videos, and turns out, while there's lots of great resources for putting stuff together, there's also people who tell you to put things together wrong, because not everyone's an expert online. So there was one guy who I remember that said, don't make your belts too tight, because if you make it too tight, the belts will wear out fast. I made it really tight. So I was like, oh, okay, let's try it without. And then I made it a little bit looser, and then the prints were awful. Turns out it does need to be tight. You don't want slack. Make sure you tighten those belts. But anyway, let's get on to talking about the rest of these. So, quite a few things I printed out here. The first thing I did do with my printer was do tests. I've got quite a lot of these little discs here. The first test I did was a leveling test, so to level the bed, make sure everything's set up. You don't want your hot end grinding into your base plate, so a leveling test first. After my leveling test, I ended up doing one of these, which is just the overall testing of angles, bridging, seeing whether or not you get stringing, seeing whether you're doing things around, printing test, printing overhangs at different degrees, at different steps. I broke this because I was playing with it. And just with my base settings, just using not a Cura or Simply 3D, but just the piece of software the Ender 3 comes with on the micro SD, I got great results. Now, after I did this, I then did a stringing test, and I'll show you these up closer, but there was always a little bit of stringing and a little bit of kind of overhang between the 2 points. I was not able to get this fixed at all until I switched spools from the free one to the grey PLA, and this is what I got, and it just fixed all my stringing problems, exact same settings, just PLA. Now, the first thing I actually printed as a functional thing or a thing I want to print It was something to convince my girlfriend that this 3D printer is not just a waste of money. So she said, "Oh, can you print anything?" Yes, I can print anything within reason made out of plastic. Can it print me a heart-shaped box? Luckily, there's a heart-shaped box right on here. So that's what I did. Got a little bit of jewelry in here. And the print was really good and swell. I'm very happy. It's also quite nice because this has a little bit of overhang. So you can see like what the printer can cope with. Only thing is I can kind of like see some lines up here on the top. It's not as clean. So that's where I need to learn about sanding. That will help in the future. So after I did that, the next thing I was interested in was minis. One of the reasons I've got this is I've done 3D before. I used to work in the games industry and I like 3D modeling and I like buying models and seeing models. So I have these 1, 2, 3, 4. This is a female werewolf which I found on Thingiverse, which I'll link below. I learned quite a few things with this. So I just tried to print it just with a skirt. Didn't work. It got to like here, and then because the skirt, there wasn't like enough weight or support, it just totally like went over to the side. So I only have like a couple of pieces that get printed out. Next, I changed it from a skirt to a raft, so like base, and then it kind of like got to this point, but then we had some problems over here, the leg, and here for the arm. And one of the reasons was these supports. These are just the generic supports. They weren't doing great. I need to kind of like increase the amount of support I was giving, which I then did increase the amount of support I was giving, but it wasn't quite enough because the arm still here went. So I increased the angle that the supports went on. I changed as well from generic supports to tree supports. And then I got this, which allowed this arm here, because this arm failed in every build, gave this a little bit of support and allowed this arm to complete. And this female werewolf, I'm very happy with. I haven't took it off yet just to show you the comparison, but all of these three were done with base settings in Cura. I just selected the 2mm profile and then I changed it to 1mm and made it a little bit slower. And this provided me a really nice result without doing many tweaks. One of the dangers I did find though, that sometimes I did over tweaking, and then because I tweaked the Cura profile so much, it meant that I got lost and I started to have prints failing and I didn't know why. So I always usually go back to those base parameters. If I make one that works, I save the profile off. Now, after I had the thing to convince my girlfriend and to make models, I then decided let's go for functionality. The main reason of these three was to save space. If you see there's a video of a tour of my flat, I'm not in the biggest apartment ever, and I've been here about 8 to 10 months now, so I'm getting to fill it up with stuff a lot more, which means I need to try and save space. And the first thing I decided was to print out this Ps4 Stand. Found this on Thingiverse, link below. And this one is really good because a normal PS4, one controller down on its side, takes up the same amount of space. Now for this one, this was really interesting because it was my first thing to glue together. The base, the supports, and the top part are all printed out separately. You can print out the top and the support together, but I found it like has so much support material that I just didn't want to waste it. The print isn't the cleanest because it's for functionality, so I wasn't really concerned with how pretty or smooth it was. I was more concerned with it working and being functional, and I don't want to wait 6 hours for a print that I was able to do in 2. I did try printing this from the bottom below with no supports, and I did try it with supports for varying results. So on the top, there's lots of these lines where it's not clear and not smooth. And on the bottom, there's just a little bit from the supports that were pulled off. If I was to print this again, I'd print this on its side. When you have these circular shapes, either at the top or the bottom of a print, it doesn't always build great. there can be a lot of deforming, and especially because you're putting more and more weight on a small surface. So you may not be able to get a good spread, and the more weight that goes on, it may change and warp. But overall, I'm very happy with this and how it can store my controllers. So what I did after that was Nerf gun darts. As you know, Nerf gun darts, if you have them, they kind of just go everywhere. They're just laying around. They go in a drawer. Because they're laying around, you may put things on top of them. They get squished. They then don't work anymore. So by printing out this nifty little design, allows me to store them nice and easy. And what's cool about this design is you can either have it to go in a drawer, but it's also got this, so if you were in your kid's room or something, you could always just have it here on the wall, just if you're not wanting to take up surface space. Does this actually fit into the corkboard? Genius. Genius. So, these things were pre-designed and I did take them off to Thingiverse. But then we'll move on to the final thing, which one of the things I said before was I have done 3D before, so I wanted to design something myself. What is this? Any ideas? This is a headset stand. So this goes onto the side of my table here, and it allows me to hang my headphones, my headset onto that. So this was great because it was nice and simple. It's something I could measure. I could do it in 3D. I could print off a couple of tests, which I did do here, and then I can make adjustments and print again. And because it's so simple, it was very fast to make and very easy. And I was able to learn how to take something from a 3D program all the way into the printer, which mainly was just saving it out as a file type, which was STL, and then loading the STL file into it. So I'd always recommend, if you do something like this, to prototype, because if I printed this just as my design without doing any prototypes or tests, I would have wasted a lot of material, I would have wasted a lot of time, and it would have failed. So I printed out this, nice and thin, just so I can check, is my measurement correct to fit on the desk? No, it was not. There was, I think it was too short on this long end, and I think it didn't go out enough from the desk here. So it wasn't really catching on properly to the top and didn't really fit. It was kind of like doing this if I wanted to keep on. So what I did was I changed the measurements. I then added the little hanging hook. And then I also added something here, which I'll talk about later. But then I printed this out as the next test. I added a little bit of infill just to see how it could do, and made it a little bit thicker so I can see, like, can this actually hold the headphones? And I found that it was able to. So this was able to just hold. It was bending quite a lot. But originally I designed this at 3 centimeters, but this is, was like 0.5 centimeter. And it almost worked. So I was able to trim out 1/3 of the material and just print out the whole thing with the same dimensions. So for me doing these prototypes, instead of just printing them all out, I could have wasted, 4 times the filament. Whereas instead, by doing the prototypes, I was able to save less than if I just printed the whole thing originally. So tests are good. And one of the things as well, my desk, my table, it's a bit awkward, but this is like not gripping on. This is like the only support, because with most desks, people just make them like this, so the bottom's catching the under end. So this one goes under, but it's still not really catching on that much. So I made this little part here, so I can just put it in the back, and then this stops it pulling away from the table. I did break it a little bit because I accidentally forced it too much. But also another thing, if you make a space, like a gap, let's say, I think this was like 0.4 millimeter by 1 centimeter, and you should not make the connecting piece to fit in there the exact same dimensions. So what I had to do was I quickly filed this with a knife to make it fit, because I just didn't want to print it again. But overall, it still worked and it's still functional. So yeah, that's it. This was my first week of 3D printing. I haven't made any upgrades with my printer. This is all with the original setup. And then I also got to learn about if I want to print something small, what settings do I need, what details do I need? If I print something big, do I actually need or want those details? And for the price I got it with, it's the Ender 3 Pro. I got it in China. It cost me 199 RMB, which is around 110, about more like 120 pounds in England, which is a bargain because I got it here in China. So what's next for me 3D printing now? Well, the next thing for me is I want to practice designing my own little miniatures. I've got an idea for possibly doing like a little goblin camp, like doing little tents and a fire and maybe like a bunch of like leftover gear from explorers who have been taken by the goblins. I want to get sandpaper because, for example, on the controller stand or at the top of here, you can see the layer lines quite a lot. So I want to get some sanding stuff to practice sanding, probably some files and sandpaper. And then I want to get some acrylic paint and some spray paint so that I can make a good foundation and then paint over it. So yeah, I want to pretty much I want to get into the process or to the stage where if I want to make something, I can print it, sand it, prime it, paint it to completion. And that is my goal with the 3D printer. And while there are other things for functionality, I mainly care about miniatures. Overall, very simple, very easy. Any mistakes are easy to rectify because there's so many tutorials online, and you don't even need to make many upgrades to get really good results. So anyway, thank you for watching and goodbye. If you did enjoy watching this, subscribe. I often talk about either my daily life, games I play, or some tech related stuff. So, see ya.